Welcome to week 26 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We've just watched episode 124, originally aired Tuesday, January 22nd, 1985, and so this is the first episode of the week. We're starting week 26 on a Tuesday, because there was no Monday episode yesterday, because they had the swearing in of President Ronald Reagan in the U.S. He is starting his second term now, and he has a ranch in Santa Barbara. Perhaps he'll be coming to Santa Barbara for another visit. And I forgot to mention last time that Jonna Lee Stack was in the credits. And she was in the alphabetical list. She wasn't at the end like some of the other people. So I don't know how the contracts work. I guess the people who are on permanent contract are definitely in the alphabetical credits.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are just on for a day or two normally get put at the end separately after the alphabetical list. So even though she was only on 3 days, she must have had a higher status to get back into the main credits.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm not sure how that works. There's something called on contract, there's day players, and maybe there's this third category of special guest star or something.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, back to Tuesday's show. Mason phones Veronica to invite her for dinner, but she tells him that she's too busy taking care of her brother. And then Mason thinks, I thought she told me he left town already. So, Kelly calls Mason to tell him about Eden going to the warehouse. So they race down there, and they both get there together. And they find the toolbox and the Eden scarf, and wrapped in the scarf is a carnation.
Yeah.
So they realize Eden's been kidnapped by the carnation killer. Monroe, meanwhile, is trying to convince Cruz to leave the INID. So I guess they've decided not to use CIA. They've decided that the INID is some sort of international something organization similar to the CIA, or maybe an international version.
Yeah, I don't know if we've heard them explain what that acronym stands for or not.
No, they just mentioned it twice. So Cruz is still not sure if he wants to drop everything to be a cop.
Mm-hmm.
They arrive at the warehouse, and Cruz is kind of protesting the whole time until he sees Eden's scarf and realizes that it was Eden that was the latest victim.
Mm-hmm.
So then he agrees to join the police. Monroe says, "Oh, Mason can swear you in right away." Well, Mason's like, "Wait a minute. Well, why? What kind of police training do you have?" And
yeah.
he finds out that Cruz did police training 10 years ago. He says, "Well, 10-year-old police training. I don't know how. If you still have the skills needed for that." So Cruz reluctantly gives him the phone number of Bill at the INID, who I guess is probably the equivalent of the head of the CIA, and Mason gives him a call and is almost immediately offers Cruz the job there on the spot. So I think he now realizes Cruz is more than just the firefighter that he thought he was when his dad hired him.
And we see a nice bit of acting by Lane Davies in this scene where he's basically just acting with himself on the phone, but you can see his expression change, and it's one of the few times we've seen Mason becoming really humbled, and he definitely conveys that over the course of this phone call.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also thought Monroe made a nice point to Cruz during this whole scene where he just points out that, it was really easy for Cruz to be indifferent and unhelpful until he had a personal stake in it himself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now Kelly's in her La Mesa clothes, obviously deciding to go to work, and Joe tells her to quit, and they get startled by the sound of the newspaper being delivered, and I guess they decide they probably shouldn't move into the Capwell mansion.
Yeah.
So I think Kelly did agree to quit, or at least not to show up for work until the killer is caught. And now they're going to move into the Capwell mansion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to happen. So Sally's apartment might not be in play
Maybe
anymore
she'll get
if
it
they end up
back.
staying there.
And she'll get more hours at La Mesa if Kelly quits.
Yeah. Now Marcello comes to Sophia to report that Eden is missing, and that all that was found was a carnation and a scarf. So that really freaks Sophia out. And then he mentions that at one time a few years ago, she had tracked Eden for a month in Paris and on the Orient Express.
Yeah.
So this is that reference to the trip on the Orient Express that Cruz and Eden took, that Eden said she didn't remember much of.
And we know that Eden lived in Europe for several years, so it is actually very plausible that her path may have actually crossed with Sophia without her even knowing it. Maybe Sophia in disguise.
Yeah, obviously she would have been in a disguise in some way. She may
Yeah.
have interacted with Eden.
Yeah.
And Eden doesn't even realize it. Now Veronica isn't really tending to her brother. She's actually patching up Lionel. She's it looks like he has a wound on his back. I doubt he would have had a bullet in his back, so he must have got that from jumping off the train.
Yeah.
And he's browsing through the passenger list that was procured for him by Veronica's either friend or sister, I forget, who could get in trouble for that. But he sees the name Marcello Armonti, and then immediately remembers having seen the reference in the newspaper to Contessa Armonti. And he says, Tessa Armonti, would she take all of her costumes with her? So he immediately realizes that must be Sophia. He phones Augusta and asks her to leave some clothes on the curb, and he'll have someone pick them up, which Veronica rolls her eyes to, because she's trying to get out of this.
Yeah.
And then Veronica lends him a jacket. He says, is this Mason's jacket? She says, don't ask any questions. And he tells her that she's going to the Capel Hotel, and he says, don't worry, they'll think I'm Mason in this outfit. So he goes there and spies on Sophia from the secret room, and has a lot of flashbacks while he's watching Sophia put on her makeup and take off her other disguise. So we see some flashbacks that we've seen before, them in the hotel. Well, we see them the first time they meet. We see them in bed, I think, for the first time. Then we see the flashback that we have seen where Sophia learns that he's married. And, so we see a lot more of their early time. And then he just waits once Marcello leaves, or Marcello's already gone. He just goes to the door, knocks on it, and she opens it, and she screams when she sees him. He says, oh, you better let me in before someone comes running and sees either of us.
And actually, it was really nice, I thought, the way they put together this scene. So we actually see, of course, it's the two-way mirror that is from the secret room to the presidential suite. And we see Lionel on one side and Sophia on the other. And so they're literally face to face. So that was really nice. And of course, we also got to see just a little bit of Lionel's acting skills in this scene, because at first, Sophia doesn't want to open the door when he knocks on it. And so he poses as, I think it was waitstaff or something. And he gets to do a little acting turn too.
And she's doing her Italian accent at the same time.
Yeah, so they're literally face to face now, each on the other side of the door, basically facing off and acting against each other.
Now, meanwhile, Peter has driven Eden to a secluded area. She's regained consciousness briefly, and of course he won't talk to her, so she won't recognize him. And she says, "Oh, I've had this blindfold on the whole time. Why don't you just let me out? I don't know who you are." But he drives onwards to some building in the middle of nowhere, some big stone building, and then he leads her around by her bound wrists to the back, and starts to take off some of his clothes, and then he starts to take off her clothes. She pushes back on him, which causes her to fall back from the force of her push, but she's actually on the edge of quite a steep hill, and so she goes tumbling down that hill. And then Peter thinks that Kelly is dead.
Yeah, so this is kind of if you think about the other two murders, how the victims were raped and strangled, it kind of made me think that maybe this was how this whole hostage taking situation was going to end, because we see Peter starting to take off his clothes, like he's going to assault Eden. And then at the end, when she's trying to get away from him, he actually does start trying to strangle her.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she loses her footing and falls back over this ledge. But we're sort of seeing in this probably the way things played out, minus the kidnapping for the other two victims.
But he's seeing her as Kelly the whole time, because at one point he says, "I've never seen you like this before, you're so different." Or he thinks that in his head.
Yeah.
And then after she falls, "Kelly, she's dead, I know she's dead." So, but that might be good for Kelly, or for Eden. If he thinks she's dead, he might just drive away.
Yeah, he might still get interrupted or something, too, to keep him from investigating further. It's interesting, he doesn't say anything to her during this whole scene. So if Eden does get rescued, she won't be able to positively identify him.
Mm-hmm. That may be a clue, though. Like, Cruz may realize, if he didn't talk to you, then maybe it's someone you would have recognized. Plus, combine that with the fact that Kelly's, related to all three victims, that it's someone Eden would know is reasonable to assume. So.
And we don't fully know whether this is Peter trying not to be identified, if that's why he's quiet, or if he went silent on the other two murders at this point as well. But at any rate, when we hear from Peter during this scene, it's they do a little voiceover to do his thoughts.
Yeah. So I think he may just end up driving away, and then they'll have Eden will be safe, and he may think Kelly's dead for a while, but I guess there's no reason they would hide that from him, because they wouldn't know that he would think she was dead. So
we don't know his sort of particular way of viewing things, because he does have a brain injury. So he hadn't thought Kelly was dead after strangling the first two girls, but maybe because this apparent death has been caused not by his own hand, and whatever odd thing he's playing out when he does that, maybe because it is outside of what he's been able to control. Maybe he will actually, that'll penetrate his mind in a way that he does actually think Kelly is dead.
One thing Cruz and Monroe had been talking about is the psychological profile. Cruz thought it was pretty obvious, doesn't like women, has tragic history or whatever, so it's pretty simplistic. So he had some other ideas that might help zoom in a little more on Peter.
Yes.
And he's a little annoyed that Monroe turned everything into a circus by letting the media get on board. So we will find out how Cruz is presented to the media in the next episode, and if Eden manages to walk home.
Well, yeah, and there might have been some clues that maybe Cruz can interpret a little more thoroughly than the others involved in investigating
she's got a rope and a blindfold.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some clues there. That's about it for this episode. Yeah. So we'll be back after we watch episode 125 of Santa Barbara.
Bye-bye.
Barely a week after the arrival of Barbara Anderson, the Santa Barbara Cemetery saw its second internee of 1985. Sweet Summer Blake had arrived in Santa Barbara in the wake of her sister Gina DeMott, and had found herself a job she liked at the Santa Barbara Museum, and a man she liked in the form of Warren Lockridge. Just as she was starting to make progress in overcoming the trauma of an attack by Hank Judson years earlier, Summer encountered Peter Flint. While she and Kelly Capwell argued at the State Street Saloon, Peter Flint began to confuse Summer for Kelly. Due to her blonde hair, Peter began to hallucinate that Summer was Kelly, and in the end he left her dead in a warehouse, clutching a single white carnation. Sadly, were it not for Kelly Capwell, Summer Blake may one day have found her way back to Santa Barbara, Warren Lockridge, and the Santa Barbara Museum. Summer Blake now becomes the latest resident of the Kelly Capwell wing of Santa Barbara Cemetery, a smallish section dedicated to those who would still be alive if not for Kelly Capwell. Welcome back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We've finished episode 125, originally aired Wednesday, January 23rd, 1985. Now, a guy we've never seen before, I don't think, called Michael from the INIB, the CIA equivalent, shows up and tells Cruz that they don't really allow sabbaticals.
Yeah.
And Cruz says, well, he's got to solve this mystery, this murder, because a girl he likes is at risk. So Michael says, well, we'll consider you on sabbatical, but once this is over, you have to come back. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but it looks like that storyline won't be dropped so easily, unlike possibly the submarine and the Russians.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about them, so I assume they left the country or were successfully apprehended off screen.
Cruz talks a lot about the last mission, but not really anything about how it ended. So.
No.
Now, as you remember, Eden falls down the hill, struggling against Peter, who is trying to strangle her. And Peter thinks she's dead. And then they're under an overpass, actually, and some tourists come near the railing, trying to sort out some maps. And Peter hides. And the next thing we see him doing is scrubbing Eden's blood from his sheepskin seat covers, because she had that head wound. And he does talk a lot about Kelly. He hears about Eden's kidnapping on the radio. I thought, no, it's Kelly, not Eden. So then he goes to La Mesa and talks to Beth about the Carnation Killer. And she seems all too happy to chat about it, considering it was a fellow waitress of hers, or maybe she got hired after Jackie got killed. I don't know.
Jackie?
No, not Jackie.
Barbara.
Joe and Cruz are there also, talking about the case and going over the different profiles and things. And suddenly, Joe spots Peter sitting there and gets the idea in his head that maybe Peter's the killer.
Yeah, so Peter's sitting there kind of out of it. He's obviously... It's been obvious since he got out of hospital that he's not really very well. So Joe sort of has a view of him, and you can see him sort of muttering to himself and looking out of sorts.
So Joe reminds Cruz that Peter had lured him to the wildlife reserve, similar to the way Kelly was lured to the warehouse. And also that Peter had demanded to see Kelly a few weeks ago, and she told him no, and he'd arrived anyway, and then he'd gone away saying, oh yeah, she works at La Mesa now. And that turns out to have been January 8th, the same day that Barbara was killed. So Cruz seems to think it's worth questioning Peter, but Joe wants to do it right away. Cruz says, no, we need to do this by the book, and calls his police buddies, who I guess all know that he's on the case now, and they decide there's not enough evidence to even question Peter, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, especially since Peter did try to murder Joe. I mean, that's not in dispute at all. Mason just managed to use a technicality to get him off the charge. Because Peter was basically blackmailing him, but it's never been in dispute that Peter tried to kill Joe.
I wonder if maybe Cruz just talked to the wrong person. I think if he talked to Mason, Mason would agree that Peter sounds like a good suspect. So when he hears that, Joe decides to go off by himself. Peter's has left at this point, so Joe goes to his apartment, and that's where he is. He's busy packing up so many newspapers that he has been buying, I guess, obsessively. And he's also was in the process of loading a gun when Joe arrives. And he was muttering to himself, "Oh, I just wanted to be with Kelly one more time." So Joe starts talking about the murders, and then basically Peter says, "Are you accusing me?" And this prompts Joe to start randomly searching his drawers, and he finds a torn-up photo of Kelly, and also a T-shirt, a white T-shirt with blood on it. So Joe grabs it and leaves.
Yeah.
I think he actually punches Peter at one point to keep him from stopping him going through the things. But he's left with a bloody T-shirt, and then Peter gets his gun, which has one bullet in it at this point, and goes after Joe.
Now I'm thinking that the blood on the T-shirt, if they get it analyzed, will probably show as belonging to Peter. So I suspect it maybe won't be sufficient evidence, because I really think that Peter's got to be involved in the February sweep somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I think for one reason or another, either directly because, Joe's grabbed the wrong evidence or whatever, I don't think they'll be able to pin anything on Peter for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the T-shirt he was wearing when his back was scratched.
Yeah, maybe.
Or possibly even the blood from his neck could have gone down there. He was wearing a turtleneck today, as I had predicted he would be doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably one of his wounds.
Yeah.
Now back at the Capwell Hotel presidential suite, Sophia calls security and tries to stall Lionel. But Lionel hears the elevator coming up, and I guess heads down that service elevator on the other side of the hallway. And he phones Augusta and tells her that Eden has gone missing and not to let Lakin leave the house.
Yeah. So here we see that little secret room being really important again, because, it's not only a great room for spying from, but it's also a great room for a hideout.
Mm-hmm. It's got a phone, so you can make calls from there. That phone. Now, Ted and Lakin have written each other letters, and we saw a lot of flashbacks on each side of that.
And heard a lot of music.
Don't know what the contents of the letters are, though.
Yeah.
So,
what is the theme they were playing in the back?
Do you know? The song was "Just Hold Me Forever Tonight." Just Hold Me Forever Tonight. So I don't know that song, but I'm sure we could look it up. It's probably from the same publishing company that all the other songs are from, that are probably synergetic with NBC or Worldwide. No, what's it called? World Vision Productions. So Mason tells Ted that Eden is missing, and at the same time Augusta tells Lakin the same thing. So Ted decides to go over there because Augusta's told Lakin she can't leave the house. Augusta has a perm, suddenly.
Yeah, and, I think my mom had a perm like that in the mid-'80s, so I don't know why.
You were theorizing it might be Flashdance inspired.
Yeah, that was one idea I had. I was trying to think what trend would have prompted women to get little fluffy perms all of a sudden. But yeah, I do remember my mom having one around that same era, so it was probably a bit of a trend among a certain demographic.
So Augusta is watching the mailbox with binoculars through those French doors at the back.
Mm-hmm.
And when Veronica picks up Lionel's clothes, Augusta recognizes her and immediately assumes Lionel's having an affair with her and follows her. Ted actually comes over and exchanges letters with Lakin. But that's about all that happens there. Now Mason enters Veronica's place with the key that he failed to give her back. She's not home, so he uses her phone. And then she arrives, a little annoyed that Mason's let herself in again. And talks again about how her brother's staying there and whatever. And she's got the suitcase in her hand with all the clothes from Lionel. For Lionel. So he says, "Oh, you should put down your case." And what's in there? And she says, "Oh, it's just clothes from my brother," and brings them to the bedroom, and Mason follows her in there. And then they hear someone coming in the front door, and Veronica yells for her little brother, "Oh, I don't know what she says. Anyway, something to get Lionel to realize she's not alone. But Lionel doesn't hear and walks right in and calls out for her and walks right into the bedroom, and Mason sees that Veronica has been hiding Lionel this whole time.
Yeah.
And so he says, "You're under arrest and you're fired." And Lionel punches him, and Lionel runs out the door just as Augusta is about to knock on it. So he grabs her and says, "We got to get over here. Mason's in there," and she takes him in the car, and they drive off.
Mm-hmm.
And Mason says Veronica's in a lot of trouble, and she's aiding and abetting, a fugitive, etc. So she could be in for a bad couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, even at this, I'm always really impressed by how well Veronica keeps her head, and she actually tells Mason the truth that, she felt indebted to Lionel because he had saved her brother, but Mason's not having any of it.
Yeah, she says, "Oh, I've been falling in love with you, Mason." So
yeah.
That's interesting.
So we'll see where it goes from there, but definitely I think she'll be looking for a job at the very least if she's not charged with something.
Yeah, I guess, she's working for Eden, right? So, I don't know, maybe Eden doesn't mind that much.
Yeah, I mean, Eden, we haven't seen her so much in her capacity with the Capwell hotels, but, she does have her own relations with Lionel as well, so...
Yeah, I don't know if Mason has the authority to fire Eden's secretary. I don't know how high up Mason is at Capwell anymore.
Well, it seems a bit like Veronica's been moonlighting work-wise with Mason as well, since he's had her come in and take notes and that too. So
he's fired her from that, but she may still have a job with Eden, and Cece may not want to have Mason giving too many orders at Capwell.
Yeah. They didn't really make anything of it, but I would think the fact that Lionel is wearing Mason's jacket would also add insult to injury for Mason.
So as they're driving along, Augusta assumes that Lionel's been having an affair with Veronica, but he manages to convince her that that's not the case eventually, and they pull over and start to make out, and then they hear sirens, and they are worried that those sirens are for them. I'm thinking maybe the sirens will not be for them. Maybe they're right where Eden is, and those tourists, saw her and called the police or something. So.
I'm thinking it'll be something like that too, because as they're driving along and having their little repertoire, which for them often turns into something a little more hot and heavy, we do get a little scene of Eden lying there at the base of this little cliff. So I'm actually thinking they're pretty close, and that maybe the sirens are, as you suggest, to go and check out Eden.
I think we'll find out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Or it'll be one of those things where they'll be back home going, "Oh, I can't believe those sirens weren't for us."
Yeah.
So, and that's we're halfway through the week because it's a short week. So we'll be back after we watch episode 126 of Santa Barbara. Welcome back to Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We have finished episode 126. Originally aired Thursday, January 24th, 1985. Now, Ted and Lakin finally get a chance to read each other's letters. Reuben comes in to tell Ted that Lionel Lockridge was arrested last night. And while Lakin's reading the letter from Ted, Brick comes in and offers to drive her to school. But she says she's going to get there on her own. And by the time Ted arrives, she's gone, so Brick tells her she's gone to school. Meanwhile, Lakin shows up at the Capwell house, and Reuben says that Ted's gone to school. So they've missed each other. By the time they get into class, they don't have time to talk about the letters. And when the class finally ends, Jackie tells Ted he hasn't completed any of the homework, and that since he has a free period in the next hour, he should do all his homework.
Mm-hmm.
So Lincoln's standing there in the hallway waiting for Ted finally to finish the homework. And they finally come out so they can discuss their letters. And basically it's summed up by Ted saying that he's not going to hold her accountable for anything her parents did.
Mm-hmm.
So they tear up the letters and kiss.
I miss Jade.
Mm-hmm. We've not seen Jade in a while. Very little of Danny, too. When they were showing close-ups of them in class, they didn't even show Jade. So
No.
Elizabeth visits Brick and tries to get him to have sex with her, but he says he prefers Amy. So she replies, "I have a lot of sterling qualities, chief among them that I'm not pregnant." But this doesn't sway Brick. So then Elizabeth starts talking about her own problems, how she's very good at copying art, but she's never been able to come up with an original idea on her own. And Brick says, "Oh yeah, I've heard about that a lot. Painter's block."
Mm-hmm.
And then she talks about how she's acted up all her life, jumping into fountains and things just to get her father's attention. And that doesn't really change Brick's mind. So I don't know if that was her intention or if she just finally needed to unload that on someone.
She comes very, very close, I think, to admitting that she's been involved in counterfeiting.
She does use a lot of words like fraud
Yeah.
and forgery and counterfeit, but when referring to herself. So she's actually, at one point when Brick's out of the room, is looking at a painting next to the front door, and says, "Oh, that's an Elizabeth Peel original."
Mm-hmm. But Brick's basically just not that into her.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really struck by Elizabeth's neediness in this, because at one point, she's been kind of trawling after him, and he says, "Look, I'm just going to go out and wash the car. You can find your own way out." And then later in the episode, he comes back in, and she's still there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
He said, "Oh, you're still here?"
yeah. So.
Now, Cruz has an area that I think may be his office. Almost looks like a cage,
Mm-hmm.
but in the middle of a set of Taxi or something. But and he has Kelly and Joe in there, and he's angry that Joe went to see Peter, that he took stuff from Peter's apartment. He says, "Well, even if that blood on the shirt,
Mm-hmm.
implicates him in every murder since the Black Dahlia, we can't admit it in court because of the way you obtained it."
Yeah.
So, Joe doesn't seem too perturbed by this fact and continues on with some great ideas, like he offers to plant evidence in Peter's apartment. Cruz is just shaking his head. An officer comes in with some news that a flower vendor has called in to say that the same guy's been buying carnations all week. So this is a sensible thing, because I would think if I were a flower vendor,
Yeah.
the same guy came every day to get carnations. Now, it may turn out to be some guy who's just putting, flowers on someone's grave or something, or it might have been Peter. So
Well, Santa
We'll see.
Barbara's not that big.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's got to be a carnation vendor somewhere who's seen Peter multiple times,
Well, there.
unless he's going to a different one each time. But
Yeah, that's
do
true.
you think any guy would probably shy away from buying carnations in the days following the well-publicized
Certainly
murders?
white ones.
Yeah, like even if you had a reason to get carnations, you'd go, "I'm just going to get something else this week because I don't want to end up being questioned."
And we know that Peter keeps replenishing his supply, because he keeps forgetting that he's the carnation killer
Mm-hmm.
and destroying his carnations and then having to go and buy new ones again. So,
Mm-hmm. Maybe I don't know how far out of town Eden is. Maybe he went and got a fresh supply, a little up the coast or something. So Joe and Callie think, "Oh, this would be a great idea. We should go visit that flower vendor and show him Peter's picture." So
they just light up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joe says to Kelly, "Oh, have you got any pictures of Peter?" She goes, "Yeah, I'm carrying around pictures of my ex-fiancée with me." So they decide to stop by the apartment to pick up a photo. And then next thing you know, they're being dragged back in there by a cop because Cruz figured that was what they were going to do and sent someone down there to stop them. So that was pretty funny. So I don't know if they're going to try and be like the Hardy Boys or something and solve this murder on their own. A bit dangerous since if it is Peter and he's trying to kill Kelly, he certainly wouldn't want to not kill Joe as well. Because he generally wants to do that anyway.
That would be icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm. Then Joe suggests that Cruz should pay a visit to Peter's doctor. Actually, he suggests he should do it, but Cruz says, I have an appointment with him later on, so we already know what we're doing. So he says he'll lock up Joe and Kelly if they keep interfering. So Peter's doctor, of course, as you can imagine, can't really give too many specifics about Peter's illness. And he says, well, I won't go so far as to say that what Peter has could cause him to be the Carnation Killer. But I will say that he hasn't been taking his medication and he hasn't come to any doctor visits. And he is in immediate need of medical attention. And if you could talk him into coming in, that would be great. So I don't know if that's enough to trouble Cruz into questioning Peter. I should hope so, if he can find him. It's a good thing Joe didn't open that second drawer, because that's where all the carnations were, and the newspapers.
Yes, and then he would have disrupted all that evidence. Or, Peter might have, because Peter was fairly lucid when Joe saw him.
But if Joe had found a carnation in that second drawer, that I think would have been enough for Cruz to go question.
Yeah, that's true.
So, out in the wilds, Eden has regained consciousness. She sees a helicopter, and she scrawls help into the dirt and wanders around the forest. She's clearly dazed because she's constantly losing her footing.
Well, she's had a head injury.
Because he hit her quite hard. He knocked her out, and she was unconscious for quite a while.
She's still got the blood on the side of her head.
So she maybe doesn't realize that she's just at the bottom of the slope. That, if she climbed up there, she would be nearer to traffic.
But that might be quite a thing to do if you've been injured.
I mean,
she may not be physically capable of doing it.
Or she just may not be thinking about it or trying to find another way up. But anyway, she wanders around for a while, and then Peter returns. I guess he figures the coast is clear. He sees the message that she's scratched into the dirt, and he covers it back up with what looked like pine needles to me. It was like a bunch of brown pine needles over a rocky surface. So he obscures her message again, and then he goes wandering around trying to look for her. And then she ends up back there.
Yeah.
I don't know if she did that on purpose or...
I think she's just really disoriented.
So she notices that that's where she was, because when she'd untied her hands, that's where she dropped the rope. And so she realizes she's back at the same spot and that someone has obscured the message. And she says, oh, someone's trying to kill me.
Yeah.
And that is where we left things.
Well, we left things with Peter coming across Eden, who's collapsed, and he's got his little nylon, and he's ready.
But did he actually see her? I don't know. Yeah,
he's standing over her. In the
I didn't realize that. Oh, that's right. Yes. Sorry, I totally blanked out on that scene. Yeah, he does find her, and has his scarf ready. That's true.
It's actually a twisted up nylon, so I guess that's what he's been using. And he seems to have a pocket full of them, along with he's got his supplies.
So in that case, Eden's got to regain consciousness quickly and overcome him somehow, or someone's going to stumble upon them, or maybe the helicopter people saw the note in time and they actually are circling around. So
something has to intervene. I think Peter either has to have some sort of a change of mind and maybe decides that he wants to hold her hostage again for a while rather than kill her. Or maybe some tourists or something happens to disrupt them, and maybe Peter will run off.
Or he'll get confused again.
Or he'll get confused, yeah. Yeah, I don't think Eden's going to be a goner in this, but definitely something has to happen to change where it seems to be going.
She's not recovering that quickly from her head injury, so I don't think she's going to be able to fight him off. So.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out when we watch episode 127 of Santa Barbara. Welcome back. We have watched episode 127 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Friday, January 25th, 1985. And we had some bad news yesterday regarding actress Marge Doucet. She passed away on January 28th. Fans of Santa Barbara, not Diane, but fans who've seen future episodes will know that she will eventually play Mason's mother. And she is perhaps best known as being the girl who stole Spock's brain in the Star Trek episode Spock's Brain. She also has appeared on soaps such as Guiding Light and All My Children, and was Blair Warner's mother on The Facts of Life. And, of course, Nicholas Coster was Blair Warner's father on The Facts of Life. So, don't know if they ever had any episodes together. So that is the news. Also, other unrelated news, The Young and Restless was renewed for 4 years today.
Well, there's still fans for soaps.
And so back to 1985. Lakin and Ted go to talk to Lionel, and they want him to tell them exactly what happened that day Sophia died. And he does. He tells them the whole thing, and that it was an accident. And he also has in his head this whole time the fact that Sophia's actually not dead, right? But you can see him struggling to try and figure out what to say regarding that.
Yeah.
And he ends up just saying that things aren't as bleak as they look. But he's not able to really elaborate on that. So,
well, you can imagine that would be a very puzzling comment for anyone who doesn't know that Sophia is actually alive. But
I'm wondering who Lionel would tell. He hasn't told Veronica.
No.
That really leaves Augusta, but because of the nature of their past relationship, he might be reluctant to tell her. There's really no one else. And Warren, he sent packing. That's the other thing that happened. He offered Warren condolences over summer, and then suggested that before the police figure out that the tuxedo jacket really wasn't his, that maybe Warren should leave town. And later Warren is seen packing up his bag. So this may be, he may be going the way of Santana, leaving town for a while.
I wonder if perhaps if Lionel's case goes to trial, maybe when he's up on the stand, that might be a time to reveal it. If there's a particular line of questioning. He's
that's
under
actually
oath.
Interesting. It does. Things usually do come out in on the witness stand in soap operas. So that's actually a good point.
Well, in TV in general.
Perry Mason.
If you've watched any Perry Mason, you'll have seen that.
Now, Brick shows up at Amy's house and finds that she is about to host a Lamaze party for several couples, and somehow invites himself along to be Amy's partner, but they seem to have a good time with that.
It's a bit of an emotional up and down, as things often are with Amy and Brick, but they're happy and on good terms by the end of it.
Now, back at the potential murder site, Peter realizes that Eden is Eden and not Kelly. And I think he's still planning to try to kill her, but he sees that helicopter flying around and decides to run away instead.
Yeah, so we were surmising that something was going to have to interrupt the scene that we saw in the cliffhanger, that there would have to be something interrupt Peter in some way that would prevent him from killing Eden. And it seems to be a combination of him gaining a bit of lucidity and, as you were saying, the helicopter coming on the scene. Well,
the helicopter really was circling, and it did actually spot them. because Cruz gets word that a helicopter spotted something, and he gets them to pick him up, or a different helicopter to pick him up, and fly him out there, and he goes running to the site and finds Eden.
Mm-hmm.
So brings her to the hospital and tries to question her when she wakes up, but she has to reveal that she didn't see or hear the abductor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's enough that Cruz wants to question Peter now.
Yeah.
And so he talks to Monroe, and Monroe says, well, it can't be official. You can ask him to come and answer some questions, but we can't bring him in. So I'll go and ask him to come downtown, but you have to be the one to question him. And when he gets there, Cruz will be the one to interrogate him. So in the meantime, Lakin meets Kelly at La Mesa, and they get to talking. They haven't had a lot of scenes together, I don't think, over the months.
No, I mean there was a bit of conversation between them, of course, way back when Lakin escaped to the Capwell house after the incident with the pigeon. But I don't think there's been much since then.
So Kelly gets talking about her and Eden, and how in high school Eden would always go after her boyfriends. Mentions one particular one who Eden managed to get away from Kelly and then dropped him, herself a week later. But apparently Eden never went after Joe. So that is interesting that I guess Eden realized even back then Kelly and Joe were destined to be together.
Well, she might have realized that Joe wasn't going to be fickle enough to allow Eden to break up him and Kelly.
So then Peter enters La Mesa. It's interesting how these people just still go to La Mesa for a lot of their meals.
Yeah.
So Peter shows up. Hey, Lakin. Hey, Kelly. Of course, Kelly is fairly sure that he might be the killer, and she's like, she doesn't cover it as well facially as she sometimes does. She's kind of got a stressed look on her face.
Well, I think she's probably shocked, A, to see him, and B, to see him greeting her and Lakin like this, because when you think about it, we haven't really ever seen him act like this with Kelly. I mean, this must have been more the way he acted with her, when Joe was in prison or even back at Lyman. Yeah,
it's like their teacher wants to be their buddy.
Yeah.
And he starts talking about how pretty Lakin is. It's like, I remember when I was your teacher, you were so smart and you're the prettiest girl in class and you're so beautiful now. And Kelly's watching this whole exchange like flabbergasted. She cannot believe Peter's actually saying these things to Lakin and basically in front of her when they dated in high school, when she was in high school. So.
Well, remember, one thing we know about Peter, which we found out a long time ago, back when he and Kelly were still together, is that Peter dated a lot of his students.
That's right. There was that couple of girls who showed up that one time out of the blue.
Yeah, so, I mean, when he fell off his horse during that polo match, I don't think we saw them, but, we heard that there were a lot of teenage girls who were waiting to see him or who were visiting him. And, of course, that was one of the things that Augusta was holding over him in those early days, too. So I think what we're seeing here in this little scene in La Mesa is Peter's modus operandi as a teacher at Lyman, picking up female students.
It's interesting that Lakin doesn't think there's anything wrong with this exchange. I mean, she's just, being friendly back and taking his compliments, and smiling. Kelly spots Ted coming in, and she quickly runs over to Ted and says, "Don't ask any questions, but get Lakin out of here right now."
Yeah.
And so Ted comes over and says, we have to go see your dad, which is interesting, because that is true. They did end up going to see Lionel, and then I figured, they pulled one over on Peter. He probably doesn't realize Kelly instigated that, and as soon as they leave, Peter congratulates Kelly and say, "Oh, that's great how you got rid of Ted and Lakin like that, so we can be alone." And then he says, "Why don't we go back to my apartment?" So we never see the follow-up to that line.
Yeah.
Clearly Kelly declined to come to his apartment.
Well, luckily Joe comes along around this time, too.
Yes, that's right. And he's kind of angry that Peter's there, and why didn't you call me? It's like, just arrived. So.
Yeah.
So, Peter...
all I can think, just getting back to Lakin's reaction or non-reaction to Peter, maybe this is testament to her relative innocence. And, we remember, even from the beginning of the series, that Augusta's always been extremely protective of Lakin. And maybe part of it is because, one thing begets another, but because she knows that maybe Lakin would be vulnerable to this sort of situation, because she doesn't have really the sort of street sense that maybe someone else might have.
Maybe that's another reason she herself decided to spend time with Peter on his off hours, so he could keep tabs on her,
maybe
catch wind of if anything was happening between Lakin and him. So Peter phones the hospital to find out how Eden is, and they say, "We can't tell you because you're not family." Then he immediately phones back and pretends to be Ted, and they tell him Eden's getting better. So then Monroe shows up and invites him to the police station. And, there's the knock on the door, and he quickly looks around to make sure there are no carnations anywhere, and then decides probably just safer to go with Monroe rather than to invite Monroe in and possibly have him snoop around the way Joe did. So
find the collection of carnations.
So they go down to the station, and Cruz comes right in as the bad cop. He's like, immediately, "I want to know where you were during both murders and the whole time Eden was missing." And he says he was at home. Now we know that they are aware that Peter was out all day yesterday when Eden was missing, that his car left in the morning. So they didn't really let on to that during the interrogation, but I believe Peter said he was home all day. So that may be something they mentioned today as an inconsistency.
And I wondered, Cruz gets quite aggressive in his questioning, and I wonder if he was perhaps trying to rattle Peter and get him to kind of shift into this altered state that I think Cruz is suspecting.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I was thinking he was just angry over Eden, but this could be a tactic. Yeah.
I always feel like Cruz has a reason for doing what he's doing. So
and he asks a lot of direct questions.
Yeah.
Then after. But Peter's lawyer doesn't really let him answer anything after the initial ones.
But I would be interested, maybe in the next episode, to hear them break it down afterwards. What did Cruz feel that he got out of that interview? Yeah. Yeah,
if he is more or less, convinced of Peter's innocence after the interview than before.
Yeah, because we haven't heard the debrief of that interview yet. It comes near the end of the episode. So I'd like to hear the conversation Cruz has with Monroe, to see how they interpreted how it went.
It's interesting that, she didn't really have time, but before Peter arrived, but I was thinking, I wonder if Kelly is going to tell Lakin to stay away from Peter. Of course, then he arrived and it was too late.
Yeah.
But really, Kelly probably should be telling Jade and Amy and any blonde women she knows that I think it might be Peter Flynn, so just don't be alone with him, if he's around, just make sure you go and hang out with someone else. So we'll see if that happens in future episodes.
The other thing I wondered in relation to the interview, and maybe this wasn't part of the technology at this time or part of the process, but I think nowadays they would have a bit of surveillance of the interview. So, it would be taped or whatever. And, I was thinking some of the mutterings that Peter was having before and after the interview would be something that would be of interest to the police as well. I think that would be part of the whole investigation.
Yeah, because before the interview, I think it almost seemed like you thought they'd figured it all out.
Yeah, but I doubt if we'll see that. I don't think that would necessarily be part of things in the
I
early
was
80s.
always surprised how much Lionel and Warren would get into in those interrogation rooms when you think they've got to be bugged, right? So after they leave, Peter says, "Ha, I'm smarter than all of them, and I'm going to make them pay." So I wonder if he's going to start going after some people who aren't blonde women. He might go after Cruz or Monroe.
Or someone who's not a full blonde like Lakin, who's got more brownish hair. Or Amy. There's all sorts of candidates now if he's decided to change his MO.
Yeah, we'll see what Cruz means by going after them. But anyway, we made it through a week without anyone being killed because we had 2 weeks in a row. I think we had someone killed. So what do you think will happen next week on the murder front?
Well, so next week will be, is it the first week of February?
The next episode is Monday, January 28th. So 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, and 1st. So yeah, the sweeps would be starting.
Yeah, so we're building up to the sweeps now. So I think the next week will be very exciting, and I think there'll be... I think we're still building up to Kelly and Joe's wedding.
Yeah, which would be 3 weeks away from this point.
On Valentine's Day. So I think they're going to hit the accelerator up until that wedding. So I think more people will be killed. I noticed they've shown that blonde waitress a couple of times.
There was a brunette waitress in this episode, and I thought it was Sally, but they never talked to her, and she had no lines. So maybe it was someone else.
Yeah, so I think that waitress might be... She would not represent a change in profile for Peter, but I think she could be thrown into the mix. I think one of the more visible characters will probably be threatened too, perhaps in the next couple of weeks. Certainly we saw a high-profile character with Eden getting very close to being murdered as part of Peter's murder spree. I think maybe we'll see another character in danger as well.
I really don't have much memory of how the murder unfolded. Like all I remembered from 35 years ago was that, of course, Peter was the Carnation Killer. I knew that, and I remember that he'd killed Gina's sister. Although, as I mentioned when she came on, I wasn't really sure who she was. And the only other thing I can remember is the last person that Peter kills. So from now until then, it's all new to me. So.
Yeah. I think he will be stalking Kelly right up to and probably dramatically in some way on her wedding day.
I can imagine her getting ready at the church and him kidnapping her, and everyone's waiting for her to walk down the aisle and she's vanished.
Something like that.
That's very soapy. So.
Yeah.
All right. So we're thinking Beth may be a good potential target for this coming week.
I think Beth will probably be in the mix, depending on how much they want to do with Ted and Lakin and their classroom at Lyman. I still think that their teacher is potential if they're still going with blonde women. But I do think, as I say, I think perhaps one of the other characters will will be in danger as well. Maybe even Laken or Jade or Amy or Liz.
Mm-hmm. Do you think anyone will leave the show this week without being murdered?
Well, it's possible. It's a soap
I mean,
opera.
it seems wasteful though. If you
Yeah.
if you're thinking this person's storyline is coming to an end, and you're in the middle of a serial killer story, you might as well add a victim to the count. So
Yeah, I mean, unless it's a change-up of actor like we saw with Joe. So far in this series, they haven't thrown away too many characters. I mean, they did throw away the doctor who was Kelly's best friend near the beginning, and they've thrown away the Russians. We've never seen them again.
I've never really gotten the sense that Elizabeth is supposed to be a permanent character.
No.
And I really can't think of too many more beats to her story.
No.
So it's possible that her time's coming to an end soon. Will it overlap with the killing story?
I always assumed with Liz that her story would end in a bang for Lionel in showing him to be his, all these things he brought up from the Amanda Lockridge to be counterfeit, and most of the paintings in his home to be counterfeit. I always thought that her arc was probably part of the downfall of Lionel Lockridge, but we haven't really seen that intersection of them again.
It's been kind of on hold a little,
Yeah.
with all this other stuff happening.
Yeah.
With Sophia, so.
But of the main characters, I mean, we've seen Santana kind of get a send off. I mean, I'm sure she'll be back, probably in another form. We saw John get a send off. Even Ginger kind of went out in her blaze of glory. Mm-hmm. So a lot of characters have gotten a bit more of a send off. Even Summer, in being a murder victim, and then propelling, of course, Warren's exit now too. Whether that's a permanent or semi-permanent one, or whether he'll be back next week, who knows.
And Mr. Bottoms came and went.
Yeah. So I think if another major character goes, I would think it would be set up and handled somehow. I don't think they would just disappear.
Well, we will see when we watch episode 128 of Santa Barbara. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thank you. Saved my life.